So we just want to take this morning session again, just to kind of do from different perspective, different angle, and again, just kind of keep going over this Old Testament story. What's kind of some different points that are important, and just kind of put those pieces together more and more and more. So Josh Seykora is a great gift to us this morning. I'm excited to have him here. Josh, I first met Josh, 6 years ago. He flew over here for 3 weeks and helped us develop kind of the method for how we were going to do the research for the Sphere View, Source View Bible, which ended up being 40,000 hours of research. So Josh was here for that. Josh has been on staff with YWAM for a long time, mostly out of YWAM Perth. He's run BSN's Bible School for the Nations, just an incredible teacher of the Bible. He's currently helping to form the brand new College of Sports and Fitness. And so just the last couple of weeks, him and, what was his name, Andy, who came here for like a week, they're creating all the way through bachelor degrees within that college. And so they're getting ready for that kind of thing. So it's going to be awesome. Josh has been teaching over in Fire and Fragrance twice a week? Once a week. So if you hear them go crazy, that's him walking them through the Bible, kind of like what we wanted to do this morning. So Josh, come on up. We're going to give you as much time as we can this morning. Josh and his wife were also the first ones to come help us celebrate when I got engaged a few weeks ago, so super fun. They know my fiance better than I do currently, but soon that'll change. It's slowly changing. I'm like, okay. So anyways, Lord Jesus, thank you for Joshua. Lord, thank you for his family, God. Thank you for just his love and passion for the word this morning, God. I just pray you would help just each and every one of us just to get a better glimpse and a better understanding. Lord, help us just to understand, God, what this word actually means for our lives, and God, how it's just critical to where we're going in the future. So, Father, anoint him, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Nathaniel. It's true. I keep telling Nathaniel, the one thing I'll always have is that I've known his fiance or wife longer than him. So, she was a student of ours in the BSM. Her and I staffed DTS together. Guys, I'm really excited to be here this morning. I was secretly just hoping someday God would open a door for me to teach in the Rev&Ref, because I believe in this course. I believe in the vision of it. I mean, what you guys are getting is brand new. There's variations of it popping up in other places in the world, but this one's unique in many ways. So I'm really excited. I got to sit in meetings with Nathaniel and David and see all the work they poured in. So I just have a small job this morning. Basically, we're just going to try to tie up the Old Testament, the story. All right, some of it's just going to be, some of you're going to heard before. Some of it may be like, okay, good, I see how this maybe connects. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to place the books of the Bible for you. I think that's happened a little bit already. We're just going to get a story. There's probably no way that you can possibly write down fast enough, maybe if you're a good typer, everything I'll have on the screen. I'll make this available. I'll send it to you guys as a PDF or some format so you can have. And but it's going to be a lot of pictures, some maps, some diagrams. I love the story of the Old Testament. When I came to YWAM, I couldn't believe how much they read the Old Testament. It really opened my eyes. I didn't understand it. I didn't see God's character in it. And it's now part of the favorite part of the Bible, in a way. Okay. So I titled this "Understanding," or gaining understanding and the significance of God's hand in human history, because God did create human history. All right. However we view history outside of human history, before that, God created human history, and I believe that the Bible shows us history is going somewhere. Okay. That God had a purpose and a plan in human history. It's revealed through His covenants. It's revealed through His purposes, and we see His character manifested by His faithfulness to those covenants, or even when those covenants were broken. But before anything, this is my family. I always got to introduce my family. That's my wife, Sarah, and we have 4 children. They're troopers. Our oldest is Noah. Second is Caleb. Third one is Thaden. Fourth one is a little girl named Julia. And they are full on, and they love life. They love people. So let's get started. If there are questions, I'm happy to maybe pause for some, but we'll just see how that goes. All right? Okay. Genesis, y'all. I love the book of Genesis. I love the story of Genesis. Genesis is the beginning of everything in human history. Genesis is a time where we see God's Spirit hovering, brooding, anticipating over creation. Have you ever been around a pregnant woman? Have you ever been around a pregnant woman in about the 8th or 9th month? They get an incredible amount of energy and an incredible amount of anticipation. They start to do things that were deemed humanly impossible. Okay, they start nesting. All right, they start preparing. They start dreaming about the child that's going to come. They start making nurseries and buying diapers or nappies, depending where you're from. And they start, anticipating. That's what God was doing. I really believe that when God created the earth and the universe, it was an anticipation of the greatest creation that was mankind that he was going to place in there. He took something that was chaotic and he formed something that was full of order, full of beauty, and full of abundance. Right there we see that God in plural created as one in unity. It's seen in the Hebrew use of the nouns and the verbs. And it's really an exciting thing, guys, that God did this. He created human history. He's involved in human history. We know that God, whatever the 7 days look like, and I know you've had teaching on this, I'm not going to go into it, but God, was anticipating the creation of people, and I believe that's why he created the world. And what I love is that when he created mankind, everything was good up until that point. But then he created mankind, and it was very good. There was only one thing that wasn't good about it. What was it? Alone. Adam was alone. And how did he show Adam, not only that he was alone, but that Adam was very different? What did God do? What? What did he do? Well, he breathed life into Adam, but how did he show Adam that you're very different, that you're alone, that something's not right? The animals, all the animals came in front. I think God was showing Adam, there's something very special about you, something very different about you, and it's not good that you're alone. I'm going to create a helper. Did you guys talk about the helper?
Oh, no.
Did you talk about the Ezer? 22 times in the Bible, in the Old Testament, the word Ezer, helper, is used in the Bible. 22 times. 2 times it describes Eve. The other 20 times it describes an army of God. And it describes it in a time when people are going to that army of God for help. They're going to a helper who is formidable and capable. But to not be confused, that woman was more than man. God had a qualifier with the Hebrew that made her equal to, but different. That's amazing, y'all. Okay? So that's what God was doing. He was showing Adam that there's no other created being like him, and that Adam and Eve were created and designed for relationship with God and with one another. And God is going to try to fight for that, maintain it. Did you guys see this from David? So this is a word cloud. This is all the acts of God that he did or says he will do in Genesis. I heard it quoted once that man only knows the love of God by the way in which God loves them or shows them or demonstrates love or acts. Man only knows the love of God in the way in which God acts towards man. So I can read all the descriptions of God's loving character in the Bible. But where do I see compassion? Where do I see mercy? Where do I see justice? And these actions of God where he's the subject show us this is what God does or intends to do. What do you see? What sticks out to you on this slide? What do you see first? What? We'll bless. What else? We'll not destroy. What else? We'll give. Those are very positive things, y'all. Those are very positive aspects of God's character. The bigger the word, the more frequently it happens. It's a word cloud. So God does punish, God does destroy, but right up here, God will destroy. Right? Must die, yeah. And you do have to work that out with God's character. But this is what all the things that God does or intends to do in the book of Genesis. It's the actions of God. Genesis shows us the beginnings of so many things. Genesis shows us the origins not only of mankind and human history, but we see the first sin. I love teaching on the tree. I love provoking people. We get so wrapped up in the trees. What was God's command? God gave a command. Did Adam and Eve know the command? They knew the command. Why did God give them the command? Did he know they were going to fail? Did he didn't want them to fail? I always ask this. Did God hope they would obey? Did God, do you think they had the ability to obey? Why would God need to give a command in the first place if there's a potential to disobey? How do we know something of value if we're never given a choice? Maybe God just wanted them to recognize that He was the most supreme being. He was the one to have a relationship with and for. Hallelujah. Thank you so much. I'll take that right now. You're amazing. Woo! So that's, to think through this. What was God after? God's a God of relationship. What is He after? What is He going for in the Old Testament? I believe He's going for a relationship. He's really trying to set that up. He's trying to teach and show us things, okay? We see the first conflict between Cain and Abel. It was devastating. We see the birth of nations for mankind, the spread of nations across the planet, really, across the Middle East. All right? But we also see the first time that God had to act, potentially, was something that was disastrous. The flood. Who's seen the movie Noah?
Terrible.
Who said that? Why? Okay, why is it terrible?
It's not biblically sound.
It's not, and why? How do you know it's not biblically sound? I'm not saying it's not. I'm just wondering. It didn't seem to follow the storyline. I think a lot of people were put off by the book of Noah, or the movie Noah, because is it biblically sound? And the people who are Christians were like, well, they're just taking liberty. We got to make a movie based on limited information. There were a few Christian authors and scholars who noted right away that there was a lot of imagery drawn from other places in the Bible. Okay? Now, Noah, though, if that movie, like it or hate it, question it or not, one thing that shows us, I think, is a picture of wickedness among the face of the earth at that time. And we see God coming down to judge wickedness. I've heard mathematicians, who are the people that work with all the numbers? What are they? Hamilton. Actuaries, okay? They look at these numbers, these mathematicians, they reckon that maybe there was 25 billion people alive. I don't know if that's true, but most people agree were at least as many people on the earth then as there is now. And the God looked down and He saw that the extent of human wickedness on the earth, He saw that everything they thought or imagined was evil all of the time. And the Lord was sorry He had put them on the earth, and it broke His heart. Sometimes we miss that verse. A God of relationship created people for relationship, to have a relationship. He looks down and everything they're doing is breaking relationship with Him and with one another. I can't imagine anyone in this room would want their children born into that setting. What is a God of justice and of love to do? And we see the judgment of the flood, but we miss this part. It broke His heart. It broke His heart. I learned from a pastor that grief is proportional to intimacy and loss. Okay? We hear someone dies that we don't know, we're like, that's really sad. And maybe the person close to me, I'm like, that's really sad. Someone close to us dies, it's grief. Intimacy. The closer the intimacy, the greater the grief. The closer the shock value or the loss, the greater the grief. Do you understand what I'm getting at? God's heart was broken because of His intimacy with people. His desire for intimacy. And it broke His heart. And so He did destroy the earth. I don't see that He did it out of anger. I see He did it out of a broken heart. They were killing one another, hurting one another. And so God decides to start over. He actually says that He wished He hadn't done it. Nakam, the Hebrew word nakam, He relented. Similar to the Greek word metanoia, to repent, to change direction. Have you ever done something that was intended for good and it turned out so poorly you wish you hadn't done it? It might give us even just a glimpse of an idea of what was going on with God. We miss the emotion, the heart of God sometimes. Okay? It's a God of relationship. So God sets about, to build a nation that represents Him on the earth for all people. He sets about to build a nation that will bless all peoples of the earth. He's after everyone. And so He chooses a man, Abraham, and He makes a covenant with him. I'm going to bless you, Abraham. Why? You've probably heard this. Why? Why was Abraham blessed?
Faith.
No, but why was he blessed? He did have faith. But why did God bless Abraham? What? Because he's the only righteous man? Who here would love to be married to Abraham? He is righteous. What? No, if you're married to Abraham, you're potentially sharing a bed with Pharaoh. Okay, I'm just saying, you get lied about. Why did He bless Abraham? What's God's motivation?
To bless others.
To bless others. And He found a man who was righteous. Why was Abraham righteous? Faith. God's motivation to choose Abraham was to bless all people on the earth. He found a man, he spoke to a man, the man obeyed. His obedience, his faith, was counted as righteousness. So God's purpose was to bless all people on the earth. And so he made a covenant with Abraham. That covenant was passed on to Isaac. That covenant was passed on to Jacob. All the while, God's purpose to bless all families, all peoples, all of the earth. That was God's motivation and his desire. It's who he is. And so he passes his covenant down. He's going to build a nation out of them. And then Jacob wrestles with God. He walks away from this encounter with God, changed name. He's injured and he's blessed. And his name becomes Israel. Basically to wrestle with God in a sense. You wrestle with God and was blessed. And God's going to build a nation to bless all nations of the world. The amazing thing about Abraham's life is the amount of time that Abraham displayed faith. He left his home at age 75, and there was a promise of a son in Genesis 15. That's where Abraham's faith, he believed God, and he was made righteousness. Righteousness is right standing with God. There's one way to have a right standing with God, and that's through faith, which then comes out as obedience. The Hebrew concept of righteousness is highly relational. There's a right standing between people. There's a right standing between spheres of society and how God designed them. It's a highly relational term. It's why justice and righteousness are so similar, I believe. When there's injustice, that means there's a breakdown of the right order of relationships, and we want to make it right. And God shows us how to do that. So Abraham's faith is seen as righteousness. He later, has his own child with Hagar. Ishmael, who is not the promised child, finally at 99, the promise of a son, and that son comes when he's about 100 years old, about 25 years after the initial promise. That's incredible faith. That's incredible righteousness. Real quick, I don't know if you've seen this, is always helpful. So there's Terah up there on the top, Abraham's father. We have Abram, he's married to Sarah. And Abram and Sarah had 2 sons, Isaac. Okay? So all this other family. There's Hagar, the concubine that Abraham sleeps with, and Ishmael. Here's the amazing thing, God blesses Ishmael. He blesses Abraham's poor choice. He makes a great nation out of him. And then Abraham has Isaac. And then Isaac, over here, Isaac marries Rebekah. They have Jacob and Esau. And to make no confusion about favoritism on the part of God, he chooses which son will carry the blessing, the covenant, before they're born. He chooses Jacob before Esau, before they come out of the womb, before they've done anything good or bad. And Paul expands on that. God's choice is for his purposes, to bless all peoples in the earth. It's not based on perfection or favoritism. But he does work through people who will obey and have faith. Okay? And then obviously Jacob has the 4 wives, and then we get the 12 sons of Jacob and the 1 daughter, and those become the tribes of Israel. So Jacob went a long way. Everything centers around this part of the world. Comes out of Ur of the Chaldeans, which actually becomes a point where other empires rise from, and he travels around over the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia, and is shown the promised land where he settles, visits Egypt a few times, but he never inherits the land. God says your families, your ancestors will have this land. So eventually, Jacob, through Joseph, they all end up in Egypt. This is where the nation of Israel ends up in Egypt because of a famine. Because of a famine, they go to Egypt through Joseph. And Pharaoh says to Joseph, your family can come and stay with us. 70 people cannot possibly inherit the promised land. It's impossible. They're not big enough. They come into Egypt where they can thrive and multiply. And they stay in the area of Goshen. Goshen is in the northern part of Egypt. Egyptians didn't like to be with shepherds. So they gave them their own land. And it's here that they multiplied. They started to grow into a great nation in which God could build a nation for the first time in history believed in one true God. This was very different. Back then, everybody, for the most part, I believe, was spiritual. But they believed in many gods. They believed in the demonic, in the existence of it, which still exists. But this was a nation built on one true God. This is very different. So God's carving a culture, not just a religion, a culture and a nation built on a relationship with one true God. And in Egypt, they flourish. But then they become slaves. And then they become oppressed. And then they become people that pharaohs are off, to destroy. Okay, they don't want them to rise up and take over. And so this is where God comes down, and it says that he visits. He visits his people. He hears their suffering. God interacts. He intervenes in human history. Why? For the purpose, for the sake of relationship, and for this, the purpose of blessing all peoples on the earth. It says God visited them in their suffering. Says that the Egyptians enslaved them because of their increased number. And they become a threat to the empire. They would overtake. They feared rebellion. And so the Egyptians oppressed them. And that's why they became slaves. And then they cried out to God, and God heard them, and God came down and said, I'm going to deliver them. He visits Israel. And so God, he tells Moses and Pharaoh something. He says, look, I'm going to bring my people out of Egypt. With mighty outstretched hand, I'm going to redeem my people from Egypt. You know, we look at the plagues and we think, wow, God, that's really drastic. But we forget the story in Exodus 5 where Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, the God of my people says, let my people go. And Pharaoh's response, if you want to know what Pharaoh was like, he says, who is this God? I do not know this God, and therefore, even if I did, I'm not going to let them go. Pharaoh not only thinks he's God, he believes he's God. He's the son of the sun god Ra. This is not just some man. I don't believe, God wanted to particularly do it to this Pharaoh. This Pharaoh had the unfortunate circumstance of being Pharaoh at the time in history when God said it's time to bring my people out. Not to destroy Egypt, but to bless the nations of the world. So Pharaoh says, I'm not going to listen, so God starts doing these miracles. Blood into the water, frogs, and the Pharaoh's magicians duplicate these plagues. Now, another picture of what Pharaoh's like. Pharaoh says, Moses, the frogs got to go, bro. Please, get the frogs out of here. Imagine, you guys got to imagine frogs, everywhere. You go to the bathroom, the toilet, frogs are coming out of it. You go to eat your cereal in the morning, frogs are in it. They're in your bed with you. They are everywhere. And David Hewitt has the possibility to go to God and say, God, take the frogs away. Okay? And so, okay, well, actually, no, David's Pharaoh, and Nathaniel's Moses. Okay? And so Nathaniel goes to David. David goes to Nathaniel as Pharaoh. And David says, Nathaniel, will you pray to God and get the frogs to stop? And Nathaniel says, sure thing, Pharaoh David. When do you want this to happen? And you're all miserable. What would you hope? Now. What does Pharaoh say? Tomorrow. Pride, power, arrogance, unwilling to relent, unwilling to say uncle. What happens if Pharaoh says, I've met a God more powerful than me? What happens? The entire fabric of society, culture, religion, and Egypt breaks down. Because who's the one true God? Pharaoh. Exodus 12:12. God declared judgment on all the gods of Egypt. The final one was directed at Pharaoh, was directed at the sun god. And what God is doing is showing the Egyptians and the Israelites there's one true God. And by his power, he can be trusted. God would have stopped the plagues as long as Pharaoh would have said, yes, go. I believe it. It reaches a point where finally God's like, I have to finish these plagues. Pharaoh is not relenting. And we misunderstand. In Romans, Paul tells us, God was exerting his will on Pharaoh. The people are coming out no matter what. And unfortunately, some people are going to harden their hearts to God's will here. And it's going to be disastrous for them. And in the same way, God's will was that all Gentiles in the New Testament times would be blessed and be receiving the gospel. That was God's will. He was going to make it happen. And God knew that some Jews would harden their hearts to that. That's the parallel. That's what Paul talks about. God's a God of relationship, and he knows that sometimes exerting his will for relationship and his purposes, some people will resist him. Not because he wants them to, but because they choose to. So God brings them out in dramatic fashion. He starts to build a nation. They go from slaves to nomads and refugees. And they leave Egypt, they cross the Red Sea, they come to Mount Sinai. It's debated if Mount Sinai is here or in Arabia, but at Mount Sinai, God gives them a law. All right, God speaks, and this is the marriage covenant between Israel and God. He says to them, you saw all the wonders I've done. You saw the Red Sea crossing. God has put his nature on display. His infinite power, his infinite wisdom. If there is any God to trust right now, it's this God. Because you're going to go into a promised land that you're going to have to fight for. And you're going to have to trust this God, whom you really can't even see, except for the pillar of cloud and the fire. And so God brings them to Mount Sinai. And all the people say, everything that God says we'll do, we'll obey. And this becomes that marriage covenant. You will be my people, and I will be your God. And you show me that by obeying. And then God gives them the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments were not new. The 10 Commandments are described in the New Testament, and even by Roman philosophers, one being Cicero, that the 10 Commandments are moral, natural law. They are, in fact, the law that is written on the conscience or the heart of every person created. It's why cultures and societies have expressions of murder, have expressions of lying and stealing. Okay? But the moral law teaches us how to maintain relationship first with God. The first 10 Commandments is all about nurturing relationship with God, our created purpose. And the next 6 commandments are about nurturing relationship with other people. God's showing us, as the people of God, this is how you live. You have a relationship with me, relationship with one another. And the people say, yes, we'll do that. Talk about the greatest show, Mount Sinai. And he gives them all these other laws, agricultural laws, laws for every sphere of society. He gives them all his laws. Okay, I asked the tent over there this question. He gives them all his laws in Leviticus 18 about sex. Basically, it's laws about who not to have sex with, what not to have sex with. Okay? And it says in Leviticus 18, the way the Egyptians lived and the Canaanites lived, and all those things you see, don't live that way. Be different. God's laws are an expression of his values. It's an expression of his character. Laws are not just data. Laws express value. So why do you think God felt like he needed to talk so much about sexual laws and what or who not to have sex with? Because he values it. How are we created? Sexually. I think God maybe thought, look, you're sexual beings. I created you that way. There's one right way to do this, but you might be tempted to do it in other ways, and therefore I'm going to tell you what not to do. I'm married. I told the DTS this last week. My wife and I have sex. Okay, I know. Yeah. And then I found out that they went and told other people I said that, so I might as well tell you. Okay? So, all right? But I think God knew that the tendency for mankind would be to express this desire. And so he's telling them, you might be tempted to do this. Don't do this. It will destroy you. And these are what other people do. Okay? He values it. God shows them how to approach a holy God. God spends 18 months with Israel in the wilderness teaching them laws and giving them a tabernacle that represents God's presence with his people. The first God, I think in all of history, that was like, I'm going to be represented as my presence with you at a particular place. God's not limited to that place. He's showing and teaching them, I'm a God with you. If God is anything, he's a God with people. It's very different. So he gives them all these sacrificial laws and all these pictures and diagrams to basically show them, this is how you approach me. And when sin breaks that relationship, this is how we restore it. And so that's why God gives the tabernacle. And they truck that thing all the way through the wilderness. Now, here's this is amazing. It just keeps getting better and better. We get the tabernacle, and Solomon builds this massive temple, which is eventually destroyed. Haggai and the people weep over the small temple. They rebuild. They cry about it. And then Herod keeps adding to the temple in the time of Jesus, before Jesus, to win favor with the Jews. So Herod, this is where's the tabernacle? The tabernacle was way smaller than this, okay? It's tiny. And so these temples represents God's presence with the people, but they're not a magic charm. They're a representation. Now Ezekiel gets a vision for even a bigger temple, all right? So this is like the vision of Ezekiel's temple if we were to build it. It's massive. Right? So it represents God's presence with the people. And God is basically teaching them that I'm your God, I'm your king. You have access to me. You have the ability to obey me or not. But to help you do this, I put priests among you in the land to teach you my ways, to read the law, to remind you of my history with you so you never forget Egypt, never forget what I did. I redeemed you not because you're so perfect and wonderful. I redeemed you so that you can be a blessing to all nations of the earth. He's building a culture and a nation where they can have access to God. Now the unfortunate thing is this God who took them out of the promised land and split the Red Sea, they actually come from the south and they see all these big giants and buildings and they run away scared and they rebel. I need everybody to stand up. Okay? You're the generation who's going to take the promised land. The spies come back and convince everyone we can't do this. So God says, fine, everybody that's over 20 years old, are you going to die in the wilderness? So if you're over 20 years old, you need to sit down.
That's right.
So God holds you in some way. Everybody that just sat down, you died in the wilderness for 40 years. And God holds you accountable for this decision to rebel. We forget the children. We forget the children. What about the children? So you guys are left to wander the wilderness for 40 years. Okay? But you know what God does for 40 years? He feeds you. Yeah! It says in Deuteronomy, your clothes and your shoes don't even wear out. He fights battles for you. He teaches you how to get ready for the promised land. And when you complain about all that manna that he brings you so much meat's going to come out your nose and your ears. Okay? But this is the consequence. God visits the children of sinful parents to care for them and protect them. All right? That's who God is. You guys can sit down. So, nowhere in the Bible it doesn't say you didn't. All right? We're not the judge of the universe. Do what is right. Genesis 18. So 40 years later, God changes tactics, and they come across the Jordan River, and God splits the promised land, and they have 2 military campaigns. And the people of the Canaanites are not a very fun people. It says they worship gods of Chemosh, Moloch, Milcom. And in 1929, they actually excavated a city where they found, you can kind of see it, the statue would have been an idol to Milcom or Chemosh or Moloch. And what would happen is that these Canaanite, different nations, they would have child sacrifice. So whenever you read Milcom, Chemosh, or Moloch in the Bible, you read child sacrifice. So when it says Solomon built altars to Milcom, Chemosh, and Moloch for his wives, he built altars for child sacrifice. I'm not saying Solomon did child sacrifice. I'm saying he allowed them to be built. I find it hard to believe they're built and not used. So you tell me on the character of God, who doesn't let sin go checked. What kind of God is that? So he comes in, and this is what they would bake these children on the hands of these statues, because there's the fire. And then they would dance and sing around it. Child sacrifice. I will never say from my study of the Bible that everyone who died in the Canaanite cities, man, child, women, went straight to hell. I can't prove that. We might be surprised who's in heaven. Okay, God holds people accountable for what they know. But what I'm saying is God gave them 400 years to change their ways. And what I do know is that Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute who acknowledged the power of God in the splitting of the Red Sea 40 years earlier, God spared her. Because that's God's heart, that people would turn to him. We miss that sometimes. God's creating a nation, and the nation needs land to express a culture that reflects his character. So God gives the nation, the promised land, to 12 tribes. He didn't give them 12 tribes to go and do their own thing. I think God was showing that this is a nation that's built under me and not one centralized power. It's a nation built under me where the people can choose to obey me or not. And the land was given by size. No tribe had more land in the sense per person than another. They were not to give land to other tribes or other families. No tribe was to ever be bigger and stronger than anyone. Every tribe had a way to provide for the poor because God's with all people. When you pick your crops and you drop some of them, leave them for the poor people. Okay? Don't harvest all the way to the edge of the field. Leave it for the poor people. The poor people got to go work. So God set up a very unique system. And these are the tribes of Israel. But what happens is that God is king, but eventually the people want a king. You know, that God's saying, I have saved you from everyone that oppressed you. But eventually what happens is that the Philistines start oppressing the people during the time of the judges. See, God would raise up a deliverer when there was a problem. People would sin, they would be oppressed, they'd cry out to God. God would raise up a crazy deliverer, do crazy things, and God was their king. God fought their battles for them. But eventually the Philistines were such a constant threat that the people said, hey, we want to be like other nations. We want to have a king who, and it says this, who will go and fight our battles for us. And God says, I've been fighting your battles. They got tired of it. Trusting in God can be tiring. It never stops. But we need a fresh revelation of his character and his nature and his word to us. So God gives them a king. He says, Samuel, they didn't reject you, they rejected me. So the first king is King Saul. It says in Chronicles, he died because he broke faithfulness with God for 40 years. Saul had the fear of man in his life. God promised Saul, if you obey me, you'll have someone sit on the throne for generations. Some people think that God gave King Saul to Israel so that they would fail, to teach them a lesson. I guess it's possible, but I don't see that in the character of God. I think God wanted them to succeed, so he found the best possible choice. And he gave Saul every opportunity. But Saul disobeyed God, consulted mediums. Here's an interesting thing. The Bible doesn't say dead people don't talk. The Bible just says, don't talk to them. It doesn't say it explicitly. Who did Saul call up?
Samuel.
It's interesting. Was Saul supposed to do that? No. It's very, it's like, guys, you got to wrestle with this kind of stuff. We make things so black and white, we don't probe the depths of God's nature and character and the nature of reality. Don't talk to dead people, okay? Because you hear stories, well, my so-and-so came and visited me and talked to me. Not true, not possible. Well, if it is possible, it's a demonic angel. That's possible. I don't know. I know, I'm like throwing things out there. I don't know if that's why, but I hear your question. I'll have to move on to that, but I don't know if that's the reason. Yeah, so. I don't see, that's why I said I don't have a scripture that says don't talk to dead people. All I know is Saul went to a medium, called up Samuel's spirit, talked to him, and God didn't like that. God said that's a bad idea. I like that. I threw a pebble in the pond. Yes.
I go to my aunt's gravestone, and my mom started talking to my aunt's gravestone, and then my aunt showed up. So I saw her.
Yeah. That's a discussion for another time. But I hear you, bro. Look, we don't fear the demonic. We don't fear the enemy. But God protects us. God wants us to live a life that thrives and protects. And we become like the idols we worship. Idols are deaf, dumb, and blind. God wants us to focus on Him. We're created in the image of God to live life that thrives. When we worship Him, we thrive, even in the direst of circumstances. So my point in bringing this up, though, is that there is a nature of reality where the enemy is at work. Okay? And we need to obey God. We do not fear the demonic. We recognize authority and we walk in it. But that's dependent on God. All right? Let's keep moving. So under David, then, we see a kingdom that's established. Here's an interesting thing when you think about spheres of society. David's anointed king by God, by the prophets. When Saul finally dies, David takes the kingdom. But he's actually only king of Judah for 7 years. It takes 7 years for the rest of Israel to acknowledge his kingship. So God anoints, but the people give consensus. And David never took it by force. But after 40 years of reigning, and he was not perfect, is that he knew that God's covenant was if David obeyed, he would have someone sit on the throne forever. And then at the end of his reign, the kingdom is firmly established. Ready for what moment? I know you guys talked about this. I saw it in the homework. What's the moment coming with Solomon? There was a word for it. Start with a K. Kairos, moment. An opportune moment in time that often does not repeat itself. Seasons, cycles, things come into a place where God can move in an amazing way. And here we have a nation that through their obedience is showing the world what God is like. It's firmly established. So Solomon becomes king. Solomon started off loving God and women. And God said, don't marry these women from other lands, and they'll turn your heart from me into their gods. And sure enough, that's what happened. Solomon's life is a tragedy. And so because of, we went from a Kairos moment where Solomon had wisdom, riches, and a light to the nations, where Solomon endorsed idolatry. And God said, I'm going to take away the kingdom, but because of your father David and my promise to him, I'm not going to do it in your lifetime. I'll do it after you die, and I'm going to leave part of the kingdom for you. So that's where we get the divided kingdom. The northern kingdom of Israel is 10 tribes. The southern kingdom is 2 tribes of Benjamin and Judah. This is the tribe or the kingdom of David. And that's the one that the promise to bless all nations is going to come through. So the northern kingdom, as you know, has about 20 rulers, 19 kings and 1 king. None of them from the line of David. They represent about 7 or 8 different dynasties or families. Power is taken by force. Power is lost by force. All right? Every king follows the sins of Jeroboam, which is idolatry in some form, particularly golden calves. Jeroboam made it very convenient for the people of Israel to worship their God, to worship God through these golden calves. You don't need to go to Jerusalem. I'll put a calf at the southern border and the northern border. You can worship there. It was after their hearts, after their loyalty. And God sends prophets for 210 years, 209 years, prophets to Israel. Stop your wicked ways. Stop your idolatry. Come back to me. Come back to me. Come back to me. And after 210 years, when things are so bad, God with a broken heart, a disappointed broken heart, read Isaiah 5. God says, what else could I have done to my beloved? So I'm going to allow them to be destroyed and carried away by the Assyrians. God allows an already wicked nation to destroy Israel. They become the 10 lost tribes. It says that they joined themselves to idols. So God judged them. But not after 210 years of working with them. The Assyrians were a mighty empire. Okay, they very much took over the whole known world at that time. They were extremely barbaric. They were experts at siege warfare. They knew how to take a city and starve them out. And they completely annihilated everyone. There was no opportunity for a conquered nation to have any cultural, political, or national identity that would allow them to raise up. You lost it. You were intermarried. There was no identity left. It's how they maintained their empire. As God preserves Judah under King Hezekiah, and they're the tribes of Benjamin and Judah. They have 20 kings in the line of David. Most are faithful, about 8 of them, but most are wicked. Some come back to God at the end of their life. And they're more accountable, God says, because they saw what Israel did and they witnessed their fall. But God's got to be faithful to his covenant while being just and showing the seriousness of sin. So Hezekiah cries out, and Jerusalem is spared. In fact, there's maps that show the Assyrians have completely surrounded Judah and Jerusalem, parts of it, all the way down into Egypt. They haven't fallen. God's not about to let Assyria completely wipe out his people. So what God does is he actually says, Assyria will be judged for their wickedness. They will be held accountable. They'll be judged by the Babylonians. So the Babylonians rise up, they conquer the Assyrians, and they start to conquer the known world. 344 years of existence as the kingdom of Judah. Judah is taken into exile by Babylon in 605 BC. The temple is destroyed in 586 BC. So the thing that represented the presence of God with his people is destroyed. And Ezekiel gets a picture of God's glory departing from the temple before it's destroyed. Now here's an interesting thing about Babylon. Babylon would take over an empire, but they would allow people to live as slaves, but to maintain some level of cultural identity. And it's here that God actually preserved his covenant to bless all people through the people of Israel, particularly through the line of David, particularly through Judah, but still judge them for their idolatry and their sin. And they're dispersed all over the known world. They have no reading of the law in a corporate way. They don't have the temple anymore. Their sacrificial system is gone. This is where synagogues start to pop up. A recommitment to the law. And God, the empire of Babylon lasts just as long as God said the exile would last, 70 years. And then God judges Babylon for their own sin. Again, the issue with idolatry is it made them deaf, dumb, and blind to who God was. It distorted the image of God. It's a really weird way, a strange way to relate with a relational God. God makes jokes about it that are serious. One piece of wood, you cut in half, and you cook your food over it. The other piece you carve into an image. And oh, by the way, when you go on a trip, you have to pick up that idol and carry it with you. You have a walking staff that you walk with, and then you consult it for advice. It's really sad. We become like the idols we worship. They come out of the exile committed to no idolatry. In fact, they become so committed to the law that when Jesus comes, that's why there's not necessarily issues of idolatry, there's issues of legalism from the law. Because what also was happening when you read Amos is they were so cavalier towards their brothers and sisters, towards their countrymen. You know, you're my brother, I love you, but you can just walk home. I'm not going to give you a ride. Cavalier spirit of indifference, a spirit of, there's nothing worse, in my opinion, than being rude to someone than being indifferent towards them, not acknowledging their value or their existence. And that's what they were doing to one another. As they worshipped idols, the fabric of society broke down. William Wilberforce knew that in order to change slavery, his other aim, he had two aims in life: to abolish the slave trade and to reform the manners of the people of Britain. He saw a connection between the slave trade and their behavior and manners. We become like the gods we worship. We become indifferent. All right? So God now still has to work with this nation that he exiled. And so what God does is, we see that Babylon conquers Assyria, Babylon conquers Judah, waves of exiles, including Daniel and Ezekiel, are taken away as captives. They're in exile for 70 years, and they return from exile in 535 BC to a destroyed city and a destroyed temple. And it's here that God speaks to Cyrus the Mede, the Persian Empire, to allow the Jews to go home. So now the Persians, see, this is all the same land. People are just conquering it. And it's King Cyrus in Ezra 1 that says, this God has stirred my heart to let the people go home. And so people start to go home to Jerusalem, and they rebuild the walls, they rebuild the temple, and they rebuild life by reading the law. And so over a period of time, they return to do these things. Zerubbabel builds the temple, and then it's paused. This is where the books of Haggai and Zechariah come in, and the temple's finally completed because of the preaching of Haggai, saying you've neglected God's work and you're focused on yourselves. God's recreating that culture. He's preparing the world for Jesus to come. It's a very turbulent time. Jews are still living all over that Persian Empire. That's where Esther is still in the capital. Not everybody went home. That's why Nehemiah later came home to build the city walls. Malachi prophesies, and we get into what seems like 400 years of silence. 400 years in between the Old and New Testament. But what happens there is remarkable. There's a guy named Alexander the Great. His father, Philip of Macedon, started fighting against the Persians who were attacking Greece. He died. Alexander the Great thought, we're not done. We're going to go after Persia. He goes after Persia. By the time he's like 30 years old, he advances all the way almost to India. And he's so humble, he names cities after himself everywhere he goes. When he got to Jerusalem, there's a legend in the Apocrypha, I don't know if it's true or not, that says that when Alexander the Great got there, he had saw like a vision of a cross in the sky, and that this Jewish priest had saw the same thing, and they had a story that were similar to one another, and so he spared Jerusalem. But for some point, he got to India, and he decided to turn around and head home, and he died very early with nobody to take the throne. And so the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great was massive. But when he died, nobody knew what to do, and so it broke into four. But the two of particular interest in Jewish history is the kingdom of the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Because they keep fighting for land from one another, and Jerusalem and Judah is caught right in the middle. It's very turbulent times. What the Greeks did, though, is brought a common culture and a common language. So everywhere you went in the Greek Empire, you spoke the same language. That's helpful for communication. But it's still turbulent times. So after 280, 300 years, Rome comes in. And they conquer the Greeks. The Romans are more interested in the coastal areas around the Mediterranean. They're not too worried about culture. They keep a lot of the Greek language and the Greek culture. But you know what they did? They built roads. So now you got great communication and a great way to walk around. It's a great way to spread things and ideas. Rome also brought a stability, although ruled with an iron fist, was more stable than these other Near Eastern ancient empires were. And it says in Galatians 4:4, in the fullness of time, God sent his Son. I really believe that God was wanting to send his Son at the earliest opportunity. But he needed to send his Son in a time and in a place where it would not be confused with just another God, where there was a level of stability, where this message and an ability for this message and truth to go out, and it spread like wildfire. God does, that's why I call this God's hand in human history. It's not the question, is God sovereign? How does God act in his sovereignty? How does he remain faithful to his covenants? What does he do to exercise his providence? So that brings us into the time of Jesus, which you guys are going to get into next week. And I finish 1 minute after. So, I know that was fast. The idea was it should just wash over you. Okay? And normally I have time for questions, but Nathaniel can give me that. No, I'm just kidding. But no, it's fine. So thank you guys. Thank you,
So yeah, if you can just turn to the person next to you and in 30 seconds just summarize that memso. Okay, we're going to go to break now. We just wanted to have in this workshop exactly like Josh said. Okay, don't feel overwhelmed if you didn't catch all that, or if it was just a little bit too much, too quick, too fast. That's great. We're going to be going through this story over and over and over. This next 9 months is just a continuous re-looking at it from different perspectives. We're going to look at the governmental impacts throughout the Bible. So we're just going to keep going over this. So we have 9 months. The purpose of today was just in wrapping up with where Danny's taking us as well, just kind of step back a bit further than just the prophets and kind of go, okay, where are we in this story again, okay? Does that make sense? So we're going to have a break. Can we come back at 20 past? And we're going to get started with our last session with Danny. Thank you again, Josh.
I just need to get my wallet.